Chapter 4 of Beverly of Graustark. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Corey Samuel. Beverly of Graustark by George Barr McCutcheon. Chapter 4 The Ragged Retinue. Thoroughly mystified by the action of the driver, and at length terrified by the pace that carried them careening along the narrow road, Beverly cried out to him, her voice shrill with alarm. Aunt Fanny was crouching on the floor of the coach, between the seats, groaning and praying. "Stop! Where are you going?" cried Beverly, putting her head recklessly through the window. If the man heard her, he gave no evidence of the fact. His face was set forward, and he was guiding the horses with a firm, unquivering hand. The coach rattled and bounded along the dangerous way hewn in the side of the mountain. A misstep or a false turn might easily start the clumsy vehicle rolling down the declivity on the right. The convict was taking desperate chances, and with a cool, calculating brain, prepared to leap to the ground in case of accident and save himself without a thought for the victims inside. "Stop! Turn around!" she cried in a frenzy. "We shall be killed! Are you crazy?" By this time they had struck a descent in the road, and were rushing along at breakneck speed into oppressive shadows that bore the first imprints of night. Realizing at last that her cries were falling upon purposely deaf ears, Beverly Calhoun sank back into the seat, weak and terror-stricken. It was plain to her that the horses were not running away, for the man had been lashing them furiously. There was but one conclusion. He was deliberately taking her farther into the mountain fastnesses, his purpose known only to himself. 100 terrors presented themselves to her as she lay huddled against the side of the coach, her eyes closed tightly, her tender body tossed furiously about with the sway of the vehicle. There was the fundamental fear that she would be dashed to death down the side of the mountain, but apart from this, her quick brain was evolving all sorts of possible endings, none short of absolute disaster. Even as she prayed that something might intervene to check the mad rush and to deliver her from the horrors of the moment, the raucous voice of the driver was heard calling to his horses, and the pace became slower. The awful rocking and the jolting grew less severe, the clatter resolved itself into a broken jumble, and then the coach stopped with a mighty lurch. Dragging herself from the corner, poor Beverly Calhoun, no longer a disdainful heroine, gazed piteously out into the shadows, expecting the murderous blade of the driver to meet her as she did so. Pauloff had swung from the box of the coach and was peering first into the woodland below and then upon the rocks to the left. He wore the expression of a man trapped and seeking means of escape. Suddenly he darted behind the coach, almost brushing against Beverly's hat as he passed the window. She opened her lips to call to him, but even as she did so, he took to his heels and raced back over the road they had traveled so precipitously. Overcome by surprise and dismay, she could only watch the flight in silence. Less than 100 feet from where the coach was standing, he turned to the right and was lost among the rocks. Ahead, 4 horses, covered with sweat, were panting and heaving as if in great distress after their mad run. Aunt Fanny was still moaning and praying by turns in the bottom of the carriage. Darkness was settling down upon the pass, and objects 100 yards away were swallowed by the gloom. There was no sound save the blowing of the tired animals and the moaning of the old negress. Beverly realized with a sinking heart that they were alone and helpless in the mountains, with night upon them. She never knew where the strength and courage came from, but she forced open the stubborn coach door and scrambled to the ground, looking frantically in all directions for a single sign of hope. In the most despairing terror she had ever experienced, she started toward the lead horses, hoping against hope that at least one of her men had remained faithful. A man stepped quietly from the inner side of the road, and advanced with the uncertain tread of one who is overcome by amazement. He was a stranger, and wore an odd, uncouth garb. The failing light told her that he was not one of her late protectors. She shrank back with a faint cry of alarm, ready to fly to the protecting arms of hopeless Aunt Fanny, if her uncertain legs could carry her. At the same instant another ragged stranger, then 2, 3, 4, or 5, appeared as if by magic, some near her, others approaching from the shadows. Who in heaven's name are you?" she faltered. The sound of her own voice in a measure restored the courage that had been paralyzed. Unconsciously, this slim sprig of southern valor threw back her shoulders and lifted her chin. If they were brigands, they should not find her a cringing coward. After all, she was a Calhoun. The man she had first observed stopped near the horses' heads and peered intently at her from beneath a broad and rakish hat. He was tall, and appeared to be more respectably clad than his fellows, although there was not one who looked as though he possessed a complete outfit of wearing apparel. "Poor wayfarers, may it please your Highness," replied the tall vagabond, bowing low. To her surprise, he spoke in very good English. His voice was clear, and there was a tinge of polite irony in the tones. "But all people are alike in the mountains. The king and the thief, the princess and the jade live in the common fold." And his hat swung so low that it touched the ground. "I am powerless. I only implore you to take what valuables you may find and let us proceed unharmed," she cried, rapidly, eager to have it over. "Pray, how can your Highness proceed? You have no guide, no driver, no escort," said the man mockingly. Beverly looked at him appealingly, utterly without words to reply. The tears were welling to her eyes, and her heart was throbbing like that of a captured bird. In after life she was able to picture in her mind's eye all the details of that tableau in the mountain pass: the hopeless coach, the steaming horses, the rakish bandit and his picturesque men, the towering crags, and a mite of a girl facing the end of everything. "Your Highness is said to be brave, but even your wonderful courage can avail nothing in this instance," said the leader, pleasantly. "Your escort has fled as though pursued by something stronger than shadows. Your driver has deserted. Your horses are half dead. You are indeed, as you have said, powerless. And you are, besides all these, in the clutches of a band of merciless cutthroats." "Oh," moaned Beverly, suddenly leaning against the fore-wheel, her eyes almost starting from her head. The leader laughed quietly, yes, good-naturedly. "Oh, you won't kill us?" She had time to observe that there were smiles on the faces of all the men within the circle of light. "Rest assured, your Highness," said the leader, leaning upon his rifle barrel with careless grace. "We intend no harm to you. Every man you meet in Graustark is not a brigand, I trust, for your sake. We are simple hunters, and not what we may seem. It is fortunate that you have fallen into honest hands. There is someone in the coach?" he asked, quickly alert. A prolonged groan proved to Beverly that Aunt Fanny had screwed up sufficient courage to look out of the window. "My old servant," she half whispered. Then, as several of the men started toward the door, "But she is old and wouldn't harm a fly. Please, please don't hurt her." "Compose yourself. She is safe," said the leader. By this time it was quite dark. At a word from him 2 or 3 men lighted lanterns. The picture was more weird than ever in the fitful glow. "May I ask, your Highness, how do you intend to reach Edelweiss in your present condition? You cannot manage these horses, and besides you do not know the way." "Aren't you going to rob us?" demanded Beverly, hope springing to the surface with a joyful bound. The stranger laughed heartily and shook his head. "Do we not look like honest men?" he cried, with a wave of his hand toward his companions. Beverly looked dubious. "We live the good clean life of the wilderness. Outdoor life is necessary for our health. We could not live in the city," he went on with grim humor. For the first time Beverly noticed that he wore a huge black patch over his left eye, held in place by a cord. He appeared more formidable than ever under the light of critical inspection. "I'm very much relieved," said Beverly, who was not at all relieved. "But why have you stopped us in this manner?"
"Stopped you?" cried the man with the patch. "I implore you to unsay that, your Highness. Your coach was quite at a standstill before we knew of its presence. You do us a grave injustice."
"It's very strange," muttered Beverly, somewhat taken aback.
"Have you observed that it is quite dark?" asked the leader, putting away his brief show of indignation.
"Dear me, so it is!" cried she, now able to think more clearly.
"And you are miles from an inn or house of any kind," he went on. "Do you expect to stay here all night?"
I'm not afraid," bravely shivered Beverly.
"It is most dangerous."
"I have a revolver," the weak little voice went on.
"Oh-ho, what is it for?"
"To use in case of emergency."
"Such as repelling brigands who suddenly appear upon the scene?"
"Yes."
"May I ask why you did not use it this evening?"
"Because it is locked up in one of my bags. I don't know just which one, and Aunt Fanny has the key," confessed Beverly. The chief of the honest men laughed again, a clear, ringing laugh that bespoke supreme confidence in his right to enjoy himself.
"And who is Aunt Fanny?"
he asked, covering his patch carefully with his slouching hat. "My servant. She's colored."
"Colored?"
he asked in amazement.
"What do you mean?"
"Why, she's a negress. Don't you know what a colored person is?"
"You mean she is a slave? A black slave?"
"We don't own slaves any more." He looked more puzzled than ever, then at last, to satisfy himself, walked over and peered into the coach. Aunt Fanny set up a dismal howl. An instant later Sir Honesty was pushed aside, and Miss Calhoun was anxiously trying to comfort her old friend through the window. The man looked on in silent wonder for a minute, then strode off to where a group of his men stood talking. "Is you dead yet, Miss Beverly? Is the end came?" moaned Aunt Fanny. Beverly could not repress a smile. "I'm quite alive, Auntie. These men will not hurt us. They are very nice gentlemen." She uttered the last observation in a loud voice, and it had its effect, for the leader came to her side with long strides.
"Convince your servants that we mean no harm, your Highness," he said eagerly, a new deference in his voice and manner. "We have only the best of motives in mind. True, the hills are full of lawless fellows, and we are obliged to fight them almost daily, but you have fallen in with honest men, very nice gentlemen, I trust. Less than an hour ago we put a band of robbers to flight."
"I heard the shooting," cried Beverly. "It was that which put my escort to flight."
"They could not have been soldiers of Graustark, then, your Highness," quite gallantly.
"They were Cossacks, or whatever you call them. But pray, why do you call me your Highness?" demanded Beverly. The tall leader swept the ground with his hat once more.
"All the outside world knows the Princess Yetive. Why not the humble mountain man? You will pardon me, but every man in the hills knows that you were to pass through on the way from St. Petersburg to Ganlook. We are not so far from the world, after all, we rough people of the hills. We know that your Highness left St. Petersburg by rail last Sunday, and took to the highway day before yesterday because the floods had washed away the bridges north of Axphain. Even the hills have eyes and ears."
Beverly listened with increasing perplexity. It was true that she had left St. Petersburg on Sunday, that the unprecedented floods had stopped all railway traffic in the hills, compelling her to travel for many miles by stage, and that the whole country was confusing her in some strange way with the Princess Yetive. The news had evidently sped through Axphain and the hills with the swiftness of fire. It would be useless to deny the story. These men would not believe her. In a flash she decided that it would be best to pose for the time being as the ruler of Graustark. It remained only for her to impress upon Aunt Fanny the importance of this resolution. "What wise old hills they must be," she said, with evasive enthusiasm. "You cannot expect me to admit, however, that I am the princess," she went on.
"It would not be just to your excellent reputation for tact if you did so, your Highness," calmly spoke the man. "It is quite as easy to say that you are not the princess as to say you are, so what matters, after all? We reserve the right, however, to do homage to the Queen who rules over these wise old hills. I offer you the humble services of myself and my companions. We are yours to command."
"I am very grateful to find that you are not brigands, believe me," said Beverly. "Pray tell me who you are, then, and you shall be sufficiently rewarded for your good intentions."
"I? Oh, your Highness, I am Baldos, the goat hunter, a poor subject for reward at your hands. I may as well admit that I am a poacher, and have no legal right to the prosperity of your hills. The only reward I can ask is forgiveness for trespassing upon the property of others."
"You shall receive pardon for all transgressions, but you must get me to some place of safety," said Beverly eagerly.
"And quickly, too, you might well have added," he said lightly. "The horses have rested, I think, so with your permission we may proceed. I know of a place where you may spend the night comfortably, and be refreshed for the rough journey tomorrow."
"Tomorrow? How can I go on? I am alone!" she cried despairingly.
"Permit me to remind you that you are no longer alone. You have a ragged following, your Highness, but it shall be a loyal one. Will you re-enter the coach? It is not far to the place I speak of, and I myself will drive you there. Come, it is getting late, and your retinue at least is hungry."
He flung open the coach door, and his hat swept the ground once more. The light of a lantern played fitfully upon his dark, gaunt face, with its gallant smile and ominous patch. She hesitated, fear entering her soul once more. He looked up quickly and saw the indecision in her eyes, the mute appeal.
"Trust me, your Highness," he said gravely,
and she allowed him to hand her into the coach. A moment later he was upon the driver's box, reins in hand. Calling out to his companions in a language strange to Beverly, he cracked the whip, and once more they were lumbering over the wretched road. Beverly sank back into the seat with a deep sigh of resignation. "Well, I'm in for it," she thought. "It doesn't matter whether they are thieves or angels. I reckon I'll have to take what comes. He doesn't look very much like an angel, but he looked at me just now as if he thought I were one. Dear me, I wish I were back in Washington." End of chapter 4.